I grew up in the Bronx, New York. I was born in the Bronx, New York, but my parents are from Ghana. So I've always been a part of the culture, but I've always lived in the middle. So to my parents, I was the American kid, but to my schoolmates, I was the African kid. And I always wanted to be able to create a space where we can understand each other. And for so long, Africa's story has been told for it, right? People had heard stories about Africa, right? Whether it's poverty, whether it's war, whether it's all these things. And we wanted to create a space where there's education. There was a way for people to understand it and understand it from the perspective of a native. So in 2017, we embarked to create this space where we can find places for commonality. We knew food, we knew fashion, we knew art, we knew music was some things that brought people together. And that was the base for which we created our festival. And people have responded. We started the first year with 4,600 people. Last year we have 41,000 people. And about 60% of them are coming from the diaspora. And one of the beauty about it for me is seeing how this, if you want to say, pilgrimage to Africa for people of African American descent that are my friends or people from European African descent that come to Africa and experience it for the first time, I know what it does for them in terms of how they see the world, in terms of how they see Africa, in terms of how they see opportunities that exist for themselves. You know, so many of us as Africans, we grow up, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, you have to be all these things, and we have used entertainment in Ghana to change an entire GDP of a country in the fourth quarter, right? And that showed Ghana a different opportunity for creativity and what we can do as far as looking at creativity. So in working next year with the BAL, we have an opportunity to further connect the continent, right? And we can use that as a mechanism. One, now young people on the continent could communicate, right? Everybody here knows Elsa Majimbo from the continent. Everybody here knows all of these people, and we're connecting. So now we have an opportunity to tell our own story, right? Whether it's through content, whether it's through writing, whether it's through basketball. So I'm really excited for the work that we continue to do.
For anybody who's thinking about visiting, we act as the tourism board a little bit. So you need to come to Kigali for the BAL finals in May, and also to Ghana, to Accra in December, absolutely. So Tui, and then you're building bridges from an investment perspective, in particular, somebody who's investing both in the U.S. and on the ground in Ghana as well, and thinking about building those bridges, connecting opportunities. And I think it's particularly interesting to look at the region through an investment lens, whereas so often it's looked at philanthropically or development. So can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing, commercially from an investment perspective to, again, connect those opportunities and build those bridges in the way that you are?
Thank you guys for having me, and thank everyone for being here. I think one of the things about storytelling, it becomes a really powerful tool to get people to be inspired and give people something to chase. And storytelling has been a critical component from the investing side as well, right? So you take someone like Abdul and Afrofuture, right? So 5 years ago, we were getting on average about 100,000 tourists in Ghana during Christmas. And now it's increased tenfold by virtue of things like the Year of the Return, the Afrofuture Festival, because it's starting to attract a new type of clientele in the diaspora to partake locally in the activities that are happening on the continent. Abdul mentioned how, like, when we're growing up, your parents want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. What we've done at our holding company, we've started to look for entrepreneurs locally and give them an alternative, right? So, for example, one of our food brands, Chicken Man, Pizza Man in Ghana, is currently the largest restaurateur with over 100 locations in the country. Chris started his brand from his college dorm room, right? His parents wanted him to go get a master's degree at the University of Manchester. But here you have people who are willing to take the risk on young people, invest in them, and give them an opportunity to have an alternative. So I think hearing more of these narratives and pushing more of these narratives to investors, both locally and in the diaspora, starts to attract resources to build the region.
Yeah, and Claire, that's something that you did a lot in your past role as the investment promotion agency in Rwanda. And, both of these guys just talked about storytelling. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the stories that you're telling about the role of basketball and the impact that can it have on the continent. What are the stories that you are telling and want to tell on behalf of NBA Africa to not only the diaspora, but really the rest of the world?
I think the stories that are really there to share, first of all, the evidence of what's happening on the ground, showing the results of having a league in Africa and what it's doing on the continent, what it's doing for talent, what it's doing for economic opportunities, but also showing that actually you can go to these countries and enjoy a game. You can go to watch a basketball game, but while there, you can do a lot of things. You can invest, you can do tourism, you can do many different things, and all of that because of basketball being there. We're here for the All-Star game this weekend, but last year we had African Burna Boy, Rema, perform at the All-Star weekend in Salt Lake City. Who would have imagined that you'd have such highlighting of African talent in music in a basketball All-Star weekend? And I think this is really changing a lot of stories. These are the kind of stories that we need to tell so people can actually see that this excellence exists and you can do a lot more with the continent.
Yeah, and Abdul, I heard you once tell a story about, growing up in New York, you'd visit Ghana and you always felt like it was a burden, right? Or like a punishment to have to go back and visit. And I know that it's a very important thing for you to show people like, no, actually, you can come and have a great experience. But, we were talking earlier as well, and this idea about perceptions changing, this notion that the diaspora is connecting first from a cultural perspective or from a heritage perspective, but then is seeing, as Tui's talking about, there's investments to be made, there's a lot of other opportunities as well. So can you talk a little bit about what happens, how you grow the sort of scope of the opportunity from here through all of the things that you're building and want to continue building?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I would love for my parents to buy me a ticket to Ghana now. When I was younger, yes, I mean, most African kids would tell you this, like, it was used as a punishment, right? If you don't act good, we're gonna send you back home. You're gonna send you back home. Because of where we went to school, where we lived, it felt like a punishment, right? And what we tried to do with the festival and the stories that we told from the festival was change that narrative, give people a different perspective, right? So if you are a young American, for instance, since we're in America, the things you saw on TV wasn't really appealing or attractive. It didn't attract you to the continent. And the philosophy we used was, in order for us to be able to fill our seats and fill our stadium, we needed to be able to give people a familiarity. And that familiarity was breaking that ice, bringing that barrier for them to be able to say, hey, for the first time ever that I'm going to use my passport, I'm going to leave the US and I'm going to go to Ghana. And we've had several thousands of examples of people who have done that for the first time, right? They've never traveled anywhere outside of the US. They came to Ghana because we created that opening and that welcoming, and compounded on the fact that the 2019, the year of return, our government opened up the doors, right? And now you see similar actions happen in Rwanda, similar actions happen in Kenya, right? So all of these things compounded, and now the BAL creating opportunities for basketball, allowing young talent on the ground in Africa to be able to fight their way into the league and fight their ways into opportunities, creates this space that allows people to be able to see things from a very different perspectives. And I think it's very powerful for Africans to own the narrative of who we are. Right? It's one thing for movies to represent us a certain way, or TV shows to represent us another way, but it's one thing for us to come and tell you this is who we are. And I think there's power in that, right? And that's what we've been able to do at the festival, and that's how we've been able to get our customers to keep coming back and keep coming back. And now you have people who have built businesses on the continent. You have people who own property on the continent. You have people who have used Ghana as an opportunity to visit Cairo or Tanzania or Kenya or so on and so forth. And that's what we want to continue to do as we continue to grow across the continent, right? And most people think about Africa as just one continent, but In Africa, you have Spanish-speaking Africans, Portuguese-speaking Africans, Francophone-speaking Africans. All of them exist, and they operate in their silos. And our hope is to use entertainment and basketball now to bring them together, right? So that we can tell that one combined story across the entire continent.
And maybe I think the best way to tell a story is to give people a chance to experience the story. I think what we've seen is people coming to countries like Senegal, Dakar, you see the culture, you see the art, you see the fashion, you see the music. You go to Egypt, you see pyramids. You come to Rwanda, you see a very clean country. You don't need a visa to get there. And people would never have believed that as much as when they see and experience it. So I think giving people a chance to experience it should be the number one thing.
Yeah.
And then there's real economic opportunity in those experiences too, right? So you take Afrofuture or someone like Abdul, he's only raised a family and friends round, but it's been able to build a global brand that is recognizable in countries beyond Africa's borders. So imagine if an entrepreneur like this has real capital behind him, the sky's the limit.